Hey everyone, welcome to another exciting episode of Éire's Epics in History. I'm your host, John Fisher. So, we're just going to dive right in and just inform you of some very rich and exciting and also important Irish history. So, yesterday we left off with a couple of events like the original Bloody Sunday and the burning of Cork. Now, these events took place between the Blacks and Tans, which again were former soldiers who fought in the war for Britain, came back and couldn't find work. They were a form of police that Britain deployed to Ireland, and they were up against the IRA. And this violence, in 1920, was just going so far and becoming so violent and brutal. It was out of control. Killings were spiraling. In 1920, the government passed a form of home rule. It passed the Government of Ireland Act, which basically established parliaments in Dublin as well as Belfast and created Northern Ireland and the Republic and Southern Ireland. But unfortunately, this doesn't work because many people are opposed to this. They want complete independence for Ireland. And so around 1921, Lloyd George and Eamon de Valera, they meet up and they begin negotiations. And Lloyd George makes it clear that military concessions and partition are not negotiable. Eamon de Valera rejects this, but he reports these terms of Lloyd George to the Dáil. And because he didn't want to get involved in a back-and-forth game with the British, he sets up a 4-man commission to continue the negotiations without him present. So the commission and Lloyd George, they meet, they negotiate, and eventually the commission ends up accepting Lloyd George's terms. Now, this does not bode well with de Valera. It actually creates a split within the party of Sinn Féin, with de Valera and his followers walking out in protest of this treaty that is set to be formed between the British and the Irish. And basically, and this treaty is the Anglo-Irish Treaty of 1921. It's passed into law in December of 1921. And under this treaty, Ireland would still be part of the British Empire, but it would be an independent, it would be its own dominion, an independent dominion within what was known as the Irish Free State. It would have the same constitutional status as that of Canada. And the British would retain 3 naval bases and be responsible for coastal defense. So, again, it's still it's gotten some more independence in terms of the power it can exert, but it's still a dominion of the British Empire. And there's an option for Northern Ireland, if it wants to opt out of this, because everybody knew that Northern Ireland, with its Unionists and Protestant population, would not want to be part of the Irish Free State. It wanted to continue to be fully part of the United Kingdom, and to retain what was agreed to under the Government of Ireland Act, to continue to have a parliament with some powers in Belfast while still holding allegiance to the British Empire fully. So basically, and if it were to choose to opt out, a commission would be formed to come up to determine the exact location of where the border would be between Northern Ireland and the Irish Free State. Now, the treaty is voted on in the Dáil, in the Dáil Éire on January 7th, 1922. So Ireland's assembly, its government is now, its parliament is now voting on it. And on January 7th, 1922, it's passed in a vote of 64 to 57. And as a result, de Valera resigns as president. And he's replaced by Arthur Griffith, whom he actually ended up replacing as the leader of Sinn Féin early on. But yes, so de Valera resigns, Arthur Griffith takes his place, and basically this provisional government of Ireland is formed. And what ends up happening is a couple of changes. The last viceroy transfers the last of its power over to the provisional government of Ireland, along with Dublin Castle, which is significant because, even though they're still part of the British Empire, the Irish Free State inheriting Dublin Castle signifies truly a transfer of power, because for so long Dublin Castle was the heart of English rule in Ireland, and now it's being transferred to the Irish Free State. And the IRA becomes the Army of Ireland, with British troops being called home, and they leave their barracks and surplus equipment to the IRA. So that's a big deal. Now, de Valera, he doesn't like this at all, and he ends up forming his own party, which later in 1926 is named Finn Féil. But we'll get to that in another video. But anyway, he forms his own party of Republicans, and a civil war breaks out between the Provisional Government of Ireland and de Valera's new party. Because what ends up happening is that, in 1922, de Valera, with his new party, goes up against the government in a general election. And his party only ends up taking 35 out of the 128 seats, while the government takes 58. And the rest of the seats go to smaller parties that are not opposed to the treaty. And following this election, about a fortnight later, which is about 2 weeks, all hell breaks loose, and this civil war begins between de Valera's new party and the provisional government. The Civil War, it lasts less than a year, but it's still very brutal. And some would say more brutal than the War of Independence, when it was the IRA versus the blacks and tans in the British Army. And the reason it's so brutal is because it's now both sides have one time worked together when they were the IRA, when they were one complete Éire, one complete Sinn Féin party, and both sides, as a result, are skilled in guerrilla warfare. Like I said in an earlier video, the IRA used guerrilla warfare to fight the British, and so now you have these two sides going up against one another, using their skills in guerrilla warfare against one another. It's definitely going to be bloody. It's definitely going to be brutal. And what ends up happening is de Valera's party, the Republicans, end up kidnapping a commanding general and in the Four Courts building in Dublin. They kidnap this commanding general, and after an ultimatum, Michael Collins, who at this time is now the chairman of the new provisional government of the Irish Free State, he orders for government troops to attack with artillery, and thus that's what ends up starting the Civil War. Now, all these anti-treaty troops from places like Wicklow and Kildare and Tipperary, they mobilize in Blessington, County Wicklow, and they begin to march toward Dublin to fight against the government troops. And by July, they've taken defensive positions. And so the government troops begin to head down south to fight against these anti-treaty troops. Now, both sides are well armed. They truly are well armed, but the government has so much equipment, so much supplies. And again, like, they have coastal defense from the British. So they even had armored cars. And they end up driving back the anti-treaty troops. Now, so basically it ends up being a loss for the anti-treaty troops. But this is not the end, as we all know, because eventually an independent republic is set up. But again, we'll get to that in a separate video. There were a couple of significant deaths during the Civil War, including that of Michael Collins. So on August 22nd, 1922, Michael Collins is on a military tour of West Cork when an anti-treaty convoy when anti-treaty troops attack his convoy, and he's killed with a single shot to the head. And he dies at the age of 31, a couple miles outside of where he was born in Cork. And his body is sent back to Dublin by sea, and a state funeral is held. Now, 10 days beforehand, before his death, Arthur Griffith actually dies himself at the age of 50 from a hemorrhage. And he ends up being succeeded as president by William T. Cosgrove. And Kevin O'Higgins replaces Michael Collins as chairman of the provisional government. Now, there was another significant figure, one of de Valera's followers, an anti-treaty figure by the name of Erskine Childers. He actually was part of the treaty negotiations in London, and he walks out with de Valera. And he ends up being one of nearly 80 Republican leaders who are executed by the Irish Free State during the course of the Civil War. And his son, also named Erskine Childers, ends up becoming the fourth president of the Republic of Ireland in 1974. And funny enough, William T. Cosgrove's son, Liam, ends up becoming the Taoiseach of the Republic of Ireland the same year in 1974. So, in case you don't know, the president and the Taoiseach is the Prime Minister of Ireland, and the president and the Taoiseach work very closely together. So, that's just a little bit of what happens. We're going to go more into this tomorrow. I cannot wait. But yes, thank you again for following me and for watching my videos. I very much enjoy it. We have 3 days left, and I'm going to go over a lot of significant events throughout the course of the 20th century in Ireland. And yeah, I can't wait. So thank you. Please share these videos, and until tomorrow night, see ya.